afternoon, Secretary Bunting. Congratulations on your appointment as Education Secretary. Tell our viewers the state of public education today in Delaware. We spend over $2 billion a year to educate 136,000 students in 19 districts, 226 schools. Where are we?
We're always in the process of trying to do a better job for our students than we currently are doing. We have a growth mindset, so we will continue to work at working with districts, collaborating to make sure that we're providing the high quality education that we'd like our students to have.
Describe your leadership style as superintendent and now as education secretary.
I'm a team player. I believe in collaboration. I feel that people who can contribute have a lot that they can share, and that putting our heads together, we're going to come out with a better product, a better plan, and the implementation of that plan than any single one mind or one person could manage to do for our students. There are so many facets of education that we have. We all have specialties. Then we have our generalists, but putting that all together makes you look at whatever the proposition has to be or the situation from a variety of standpoints, and I think that's healthy. So I have a loose, tight relationship. For example, when I was the superintendent with our principals, you set the parameters, but you have to give the opportunity for them to customize whatever's happening in their buildings. In Indian River, for example, we had some small schools, and we had some schools that would have 1,600 students as opposed to 300 or 400 students. So although you can, as I said, set the parameters, you really can't dictate that it would be a one-size-fits-all that would work in each building.
Okay, now last week, I believe you trumpeted and the department trumpeted the fact that the graduation rate had increased slightly to almost 85%, and that the dropout rate was 1.4%, which was a 30-year or maybe even all-time low. Yet at the same time, the latest statistics show that only barely 1 in 2 students are proficient in English, 1 in 3 proficient in math. I'm talking about 11th graders. And what I find even more disturbing, 27% and 26% respectively have a minimal understanding of mathematics and English. Why the disconnect, and
right.
How do we get there? How do we get better?
First of all, you have to remember that you're talking about results on a single test. Any single test can give you a single feedback on how students are doing. There are other tests that can be used as well. We have a new state test, and that's what you're referring to as far as proficiency. That state test has been made far more rigorous. We're in the process of improving our standards and also our materials, our curricular materials, to ratchet up, as they would say, the quality of the curriculum and the instruction. That doesn't happen overnight. So although we have a new test, we get a baseline from our new test, and then we will steadily see an increase in the proficiency. Not that it wasn't there, but you're measuring different types of things. Our tests used to be fill in the blank. They used to be, in some cases, a regurgitational assessment of knowledge. Now students are able to think. They're able to collaborate on certain projects. They have performance tasks that are involved in the testing. So there are a lot of new activities, things that are more in line with 21st century skills. And we, as I said, are in a constant mode of trying to improve what we do in classrooms to better prepare our students for the world beyond our classrooms. And so we have aspirations of doing it bigger and better, and we're working toward that. So I think you'll be interested in seeing the scores this year compared to last year. You'll be able to see
are
that
these scores
growth.
acceptable though to you?
I think it gives you one measure, and if this is a measure of what we would like to see our students doing more of, then we need to be directing our attention and our classroom activities to showing that we are making progress in that area.
Now before I took this beat at WHYY, after a long tenure at the News Journal, I spent a few months substitute teaching in Red Clay Christina schools, 1st grade to 12th grade. And I found a lot of exceptional programs going on at schools, great dedicated teachers, but I also found too many students that did not seem prepared for the the class they were in, like I'm talking about ninth graders that may have had a sixth grade comprehension. Too many of them, and too many uninterested in education as it is. And I saw so much frustration by teachers and administrators in some of these schools. How do we change that? What can be done? I know your philosophy is, we take the children, it's our responsibility, there's no excuses, but this is the reality. I saw it up close, I saw it firsthand, and a lot of it was disturbing, and it made me sad really to see these schools that were working their hardest and kids didn't seem to care and had not gotten it, had not grasped the basic concepts that are going to prepare them for life.
I talk about teamwork. I think some of that is a remnant of what might be in a home environment, but I would recommend that you visit a larger number of schools, different in size, different in location. In any situation, you're going to find some of the participants, be they students or teachers, who are somewhat frustrated. That's life. That happens in business, that happens anywhere that you go. But I think if you got a broader view of what happens in schools, you could see that there are some very dedicated folks and some students who are very eager to learn. What we do about it is continue to try. We try to work, for example, with families to engage community and stakeholders, to bring in mentors. With our Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA Act, you'll find far more emphasis on the engagement of stakeholders.
How important is parental involvement to you? A lot of parents I talk to, and just residents in general in Delaware, say parental involvement is the key to education. What's your thought on that?
I think it's extremely important, and it comes in many forms. It could be physical participation. There are parents who have the time, for example, to come in and actually mentor in school or be physically there. Their presence is there. But you have many other things that parents can do. As important, for example, is making sure that every night each child has homework. And that may not be an assignment that's a direct assignment from the teacher, but if the child doesn't have homework for that evening, can you have your child read for 20 minutes? So there are many, many things that a parent can do to support education. We will continue to communicate that with parents and to try to model, try to involve them, try to entice them to come in to communicate with the teacher, to learn what's going to happen in a classroom for this particular semester, for example, and how they can be of help and assistance. Many people remember school as they once knew it, and just as our tests have changed, our curriculum has changed, what needs to happen in classrooms has changed, and I think if they can internalize our efforts to prepare that child for whatever future he or she chooses. We want them to be prepared to make that choice, but it may not be college, it may be a career, and if they would take a careful look at what's happening in schools, there are tremendous efforts now being made to introduce students to various occupations that they might have when they leave us. The pathways really are paving the way to what students might be able to explore further. But we do know that many of our students are going to have some type of post-secondary education. The field is filled with new things, and many of them are going to require more training than we can provide in a K-12 setting.
So you just took the job and you come into a time where the state again is experiencing budget difficulties, and one of the solutions the governor proposed last week was to cut, I believe, $37 million in direct funding to districts that I understand are mostly used for teacher salaries, and I think the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission wanted $7.5 million to target to disadvantaged students in their schools, and the governor's proposing $1 million. So right out of the gate, there's some criticism that there's not going to be enough money and the state isn't going to support as much. Your thoughts?
First of all, there is state law that requires we have a balanced budget. At this point, the prediction is from the DFACT group that we have a $385.6 million deficit. So something has to be adjusted. You have some facts and figures that are very quickly coming forth. We've been working with the school chiefs to predict and to brainstorm how we might meet some of these cuts. That is a proposal by the governor. $15 million does have to do with cuts that would come, and at their choice, they would have the flexibility to decide how those cuts come from school districts. Just as the JFC is asking us to take a look at our base budget and reevaluate what's in there to see if it's powerful, if it's effective, if it's something that we need to continue or modify in some way, perhaps even to expand. So we're all going through that assessment process. The $22 million that you made reference to is that sustainment money that is used for a variety of purposes, some of which is to help pay the local portion of teacher salaries. There is in the proposal an opportunity for districts to do a match tax. And
without referendum, though, which will
I'm
trigger
describing for you what's there,
right?
okay? I've lived with the referendum process most of my life. The opportunity is there for districts to raise that amount that they need so they would not have to make those cuts. I reiterate, this is a proposal. How this might morph between now and June 30th is anyone's guess. Right. Bottom line, they have to come in with a balanced budget. In the WHYY situation, they've communicated we don't have $7.5 million to invest right now in the WHYY proposal, which was a far-reaching proposal. It had to do with redistricting or changing governance as well as what happens in classrooms. If you go back and look at the governor's proposed budget, there is $1 million in there that will be invested in low-income and ELL students. So that is, in addition, that's a plus, that's not a cut. But somehow you have to shift funds around, and the education budget is a third, 40%, somewhere in there, of the state's budget. So you're going, somehow, if the budget is going to be balanced, there will have to be adjustments made in the education budget.
So what's your message to teachers specifically? We have like 9,000 in the state of Delaware. When I was substituting, I thought it was really fun. I enjoyed being in the schools, but a lot of the teachers told me the demands on teachers these days are so astronomical and so different than they were 15 years ago. What's your message to teachers about how we want to support them and encourage them and maybe push them to do a little bit better?
I believe that we try to absorb as much of that paperwork or the extra work as we can, either at, if you're a principal, you do that for your teachers. If you're a superintendent, you do that for your principals. If you're a secretary of education, you guide your department in making no more demands of anyone's time than is absolutely necessary. But there is accountability in this world to a greater extent than there was 10, 15, 20 years ago. With that often comes additional data analysis, additional paperwork, additional reporting out to people, and that's what in our electronic world many people expect in today's world. So that will at times make things different in classrooms. We do have a system of accountability. We do have standards that we're working toward. We have a curriculum that perhaps for some is a little more restrictive than it was when they began teaching, but hopefully it will be more effective. And you asked about how we're going to improve the proficiency and the success of our students academically. All of that gets involved in making things seem a little more demanding.
Okay. Now, as superintendent at Indian River, you had said before that the buck stops with you. You're responsible for everything. You had a state auditor's report last year criticized the district for putting blind faith in the CFO, who, according to the auditor, created a, let me look at this, an environment rife with intimidation tactics, favoritism, and nepotism. And there were grants to agencies that where he was president of the board, $52,000 worth of grants. This happened under your watch. How can the taxpayers have confidence in you that you will be a good, you will safeguard their taxpayer dollars?
Remember that it isn't a lone authority in a district. There is always a Board of Education. They are responsible for hiring and firing, as I've been reminded many times. They are also the policy setting group. So there is shared responsibility. I can't give you too many details about that case because it is still an open case. So I would have to leave it at that. As far as the current position that I have, remember that I'm not directly in charge of any money. Never have been, never will be. That's not the function, the direct function. There are other people in an agency that do that. We are held accountable by our public, and when auditors do find something, be it at the state level or the local level, you take a look at what the auditor's advice might be, and you try to make things better. Rules change, legislation changes. That sometimes just as for teachers, when things change in classrooms, that also means that districts have to change what they do, or we would be here as an agency responsible for having the people that are working with finances or any other things amenable and open to improving what they do.
Now, one of my observations when I was in the schools was there's a lot of social promotion. Teachers and administrators said you don't want 16-year-olds in 7th grade, you don't want 12-year-olds in 3rd grade, and yet we're graduating almost all these children, and I believe there's a problem with students going to school, when they go to college or university. I think 40% need remedial courses in college, and I think studies have shown that if you need remedial courses, the chances of you actually graduating are low. So just talk about how we can address that.
I think you're very wrong to make the statement that we have a lot of social promotion. That may be true in some places, but that is not true in others. We have standards. We have ways of assessing whether students are moving toward those standards. If they're following that outline, sure, then you're not going to find social promotion. There is a point at which you make individual decisions. If you have a student, but you shouldn't have a student who is years and years behind. If so, then you have not served that student well, because there are ways to intervene. If there are certain needs, if it's a language barrier, if it's some other challenge the child has, that should have long ago been detected and worked on. When you go back to your claim that they go to college, depending on what that college requires, and if there's not a link between what that college is asking for and what is currently in place in any system, then you're going to have a slight disconnect. I know in one case, for example, that the school is very dependent upon something that is really very basic skills, not the type of problem solving or critical thinking analysis that is now more of what we're aiming toward. You will have sometimes a student who hasn't done that basic skill work for 2 or 3 years because they've gone beyond that. And the college will say you need to go back and take something else. Also take a look at the number of extra students who are going to college at this point. And if you have been in a pathway that is not necessarily an academic one, but a skills-oriented one, then in your classes as you have finished your last couple of years, you have not been dealing with those basic skill sorts of things. So you have to really look at your demands of what the college is asking for compared to what the student has been doing for the last couple of years, and try to look at what those statistics are really telling you.
Okay, one of these days you are going to retire, I imagine.
Perhaps.
What do you want your legacy to be as educator and education secretary for Delaware?
I hope that we can say that we have done the very best we can to promote the skills and knowledge and preparation for a child's future for all students. I am always concerned about the child that someone else doesn't seem to be advocating for. So I think it's highly important to realize the potential and to facilitate that child's maximizing his or her potential, preparing everyone for something that is just right for that child in the world. And I'd like to see education viewed in a brighter light. I think we're a tremendously talented group of individuals when we work together for students. As you mentioned earlier, we accept every student that walks across our threshold. We embrace the opportunity to do the very best we can for that student. And that's not always an easy task, but it's our opportunity and it's our responsibility to figure out how to make that happen.
Okay, well, thanks for joining our program, and hopefully we can meet again in 6 months or a year and see where you've come and what your thoughts are.